welcome to another evening of frank conversation on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Kayla Magwa. Jihadism, clashes between herders and farmers, banditry and kidnapping, separatist insurgency and oil militants. These are the 5 major security challenges facing Nigeria. This week on the program, we try to understand the patterns of these challenges, especially banditry and kidnapping in Sokoto, Zamfara, Katsina, and Kebbi states and its environs. With billions of dollars set aside for security over the decades, political leaders with conflicting interests fingered in this crisis, and the military chiefs moving to the northwest, is there a solution in sight? Since the President Tinubu administration came into power in 2023, what is the Nigerian government's response to these challenges? And what sort of future are we looking at security-wise as a country? My guest is a world-renowned security expert and intelligence man, Mr. Kabir Adamu, the managing director of Beacon Consulting Limited, a renowned firm providing enterprise risk and security management solutions in Nigeria and the Sahel. Mr. Kabir Adamu, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's talk about these 5 major issues. How did we get here? Is it a worldwide phenomenon that we're just getting our own share of? Or is it something peculiar about our country that has made these 5 areas of insecurity thrive over the years?
In summary, there are historical reasons for each of them. So if you pick banditry as an example, there are historical issues. If you pick the oil, the militancy in the southeast, or south rather, and parts of southeast, there are historical issues that led to it. Of all the crime types that we have in Nigeria, there are historical issues. Additionally, there are structural, what I would describe as deficiencies within the Nigerian state that has led to narratives that are now creating those challenges. Then the third point is the inability of the political class to sometimes willingly, or in other times unwillingly, unwittingly, lead or evolve some of those security challenges. And then, of course, you have geopolitical occurrences happening outside Nigeria. So as an example, when a pandemic happens, and then the consequence of that pandemic on our economy, as an example, it leads to some of the challenges. And then I think there are also social and cultural issues that sometimes lead to it. So when you look at the banditry challenge, which is has its roots in more or less the farmer-herder violence and a few other occurrences, there are socio-cultural issues that contributed to that. So it's all of these things together that I would say are the drivers or the root causes of the challenges. Of course, like I said, for each one, if you pick, you can trace its origin to some of the things that I've mentioned. Land governance is a huge issue in Nigeria that we don't speak enough about. Of all the crises, all of them, all 5, if you lift the layers that are above them, you find out that to an extent land governance contributes to it. What do I mean by land governance? Access to land by the competing parties or political class that may want to manipulate the process of land issuance to achieve an objective. All the five crises, depending on what location you're looking at them from. Earlier on, I mentioned environmental changes, climate change as an example. It does contribute significantly to a lot of the challenges.
Which of the challenges would you say is worse than the others? Which one, in terms of devastation and reach, which of these 5 would you say is the worst we've had to face here?
I'll pick the political class. I know you may be surprised about that, but the reason is the political class, more than any component of the Nigerian society, can contribute to solving the challenge. But as at now, if you, and I urge you or any listener to do a poll and say what are the security challenges in Nigeria, I doubt if anyone will mention the political class. They are empowered.
So they are not on my 5, but let's add them as the 6th player.
Because they have the powers to solve the problem. But in most instances, they're not even recognizing the problem. I talked about land governance. Very few states have evolved systematic ways of titling the land. I hear governors, as an example, complaining about land grabbing. And I ask the question, if you title that land, even if it's grabbed, at least the owner it remains. As long as there is a document that says, this is my land, even if you grab it for me, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren can one day come and say, this is our land. But when you don't evolve systems for titling the land, very few governors are doing that at the moment. So this is what I mean, that the challenge is there. I make bold to say this. Every year, intelligence estimates are presented to the president. I've had the good fortune of seeing some of those intelligence estimates. I can bet you that the actions of the political class are not mentioned in those intelligence estimates. So how can you solve a problem if you've not even admitted that it's a problem? Cyber security. I doubt if there is anyone today that either has not been a victim or knows someone who has been a victim of cyber crime. Your WhatsApp line would have been hijacked by a criminal. He calls all your friends. We've had, to my knowledge, in the last 2-3 months, 2 governors, including someone who at one point was the number 3 in terms of protocol at the national level, whose WhatsApp line was hacked.
And the senator
was hacked.
There was a particular senator. I remember all of us who had his number. Someone kept sending all of us messages asking us for money.
So that's my point. But then it will shock you that most of these things are not even mentioned as part of the intelligence estimate. So when you don't admit that these are problems, how do you even solve them? What you hear are like the 5 things you listed. And then even those 5 things, the measures that we're implementing to address them does not take into cognizance the root causes. I mean, Zamfara state, the monster that we have in Zamfara is rooted to land governance.
I was just going to go there. So let's talk about banditry and kidnapping. And, initially I'd asked you, which of them do you think would be the worst in terms of how many people it's affected? I personally think it's the Northwest and the banditry and kidnapping there, even more than Boko Haram. But that's my opinion. I don't know if you share the same
So we can use metrics.
Yes, in terms of numbers. And impact.
As you know, my company produces, products, as it were, on intelligence products. And what we basically do is release numbers of different phenomena. So we can use that and determine, at a point, it was the Islamist jihadism in the Northeast that was the major contributor to deaths, fatalities in Nigeria. But right now, arguably, it's banditry. From the Northwest. And
many people, and the reason why I felt that way, maybe I may not have the expertise of a security expert, but the reason why I felt that banditry and kidnapping would be at the forefront of what's impacting us mostly right now is because of his economic drive and the fact that this is a business. So if anyone has been able to come up with some kind of business plan, nefarious as it may be, and is able to implement it, it's a plan that other people can borrow, which is the reason why I think it's so widespread. But let's go to the root cause of Zamfara's situation. And it's not just Zamfara, Sokoto, Katsina, Kebbi. Many of these states are going through the same thing.
Definitely.
In Zamfara in particular, we have at least heard the governor speak so many times about the political class, what they're doing to his state, and the impact it is having on his plans of securing the state. Let's talk about that dynamic. What's really going on in Zamfara, in your view as an expert, and what can be done about it?
Essentially, the crisis is one of identity. 2 groups who are fighting, and as it were, these groups can, at that very high level, divided into 2 professions. The herder group and the farming group. Unfortunately, over time, managing this identity crisis has created its own challenge. Associated with the challenge is the climate change issue. It's very important to mention that, first off, you have a situation where land that in the past could be used by farmers to farm and propagate whatever it is they want to propagate is no longer as productive as it used to be because of climate change. It could be desertification or some other elements related to climate change. Now, those farmers would either look for bigger land, and in doing that, encroach into hardened routes, age-old designated hardened routes, and that is the beginning of the challenge. Now, what certain governments did in the past is an attempt to designate those lands for different purposes, and in doing that, isolated a particular identity. And so adding to the problem, because already, like I said, climate change has created the problem. But when you now, allocate land and then isolate a particular group or deny them their livelihood, quote and unquote, you now pitch them against the other group. Now add that to the weapons proliferation challenge. Because even if they are fighting and they don't have weapons, the level of fatality will be extremely low. But then Libya happened, and then our borders became more porous. Weapons started coming in high numbers because there was a conflict and the demand was higher. And of course, the mass killings started occurring. Then add that to the creation of the vigilante groups. Successive governments in Zamfara state now attempted to create vigilante groups. And in doing that, unfortunately, did not embrace the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what it meant is that you now have vigilante groups that the average, I'll use, an ethnic group, the Fulani, have isolated his community. In other words, he saw the vigilantes as essentially Hausas. And because the Hausas saw the Fulanis as the genesis of the crisis or the conflict, now the vigilantes started attacking the Fulanis. So what some of the Fulani quote and unquote leaders did, whether young people who now assumed the position of leadership, is to seek ways to protect their community. And of course, they started getting arms. And who were their primary targets? The so-called vigilantes and Hausas that were killing or attacking them. And in reality, they were attacked. They were killed. We've documented instances where we Fulani women will go to markets. They would be attacked. Some of them even raped. Their wares stolen. So there were instances like that. And unfortunately, and that's another driver, the criminal justice system, the formal one now, and even the informal one that exists, failed to address this. Because if it had addressed it, then the problem would have been solved. But it failed to address it. And what am I talking about? A farmer and a herder who clash for one reason or the other, reports it to the policeman, and the next thing you hear is they're being extorted. The worst one is when the judicial system itself extorts them. And I can give you stories that we've had that are heart-wrenching. If a young Fulani person married to a beautiful lady who encounters the law for one reason or the other, he may have committed a crime, but at that stage he's a suspect, takes the case to any of it could be the law enforcement or it could be the judicial system. And Kela, at the end of the day, that beautiful bride of his wife, is taken away from him under false pretenses and dubious circumstance. So these are some of the issues that have led to the monster that we have in Zamfara.
So this is like an underlying issue. But is it been exploited, do you think?
Of course, it's been exploited politically. You asked the question around the political dynamics in the state. Essentially, and we can, like I said at the beginning, there are historical reasons behind this. Right now, there are two dominant political parties within Zamfara state, the ruling People's Democratic Party and then the opposition All Progressives Congress. Their supporters are pitched against each other. At the highest level, you have the governor and then, of course, the minister or state for defense, who frankly don't see eye to eye. And then there are several other players. Don't forget, even within the opposition, All Progressive Congress, there are political thought leaders and political leaders who are fighting among themselves. And then if you also go to the ruling People's Democratic Party, you now have camps within the party itself. So it's a convoluted structure that unless you lift it layer by layer and understand the contributions of each, you end up misreading the manifestation. Because what people talk about are the manifestations and not necessarily the layers. Add to this convoluted system the perception that the federal might also adds to the problem. I haven't spoken about the mineral challenge which is also embedded in all of this.
Well, we're gonna get to that when we come back, because the conversation around those political actors and this mineral bit is one that we also need to explain, and we also have to look at the other security challenges in other parts of the country. So we'll be coming back with that. Stay with us here on Hard Copy. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Hard Copy. We are here with security experts, Mr. Kabir Adamu. We're taking a look at the security situation across the country, the underlying issues, the political players, and what that says about the future of security in our country. Thank you so much for being with us on the program. All right, so let's stay on Zamfara for just a few minutes before we move to other parts of the country.
I was about to talk about mining,
yes,
and how it's contributing to the challenge. Essentially, the mining in Zamfara is artisanal, even though licenses have been issued. But what we've seen is that armed groups have been used to protect lands that are being mined artisanally. And so essentially the state is not benefiting from these God-given resources. And
Kabir, during the Buhari administration, they came up with something called PAGMI, the Presidential Artisanal Gold Miners Initiative. The idea at the time was to stop this situation.
It hasn't.
They were supposed to mine, but sell the gold to the government and make your money. You don't have to. What happened with PAGMI?
As far as I know, initiatives like that may be institutionalized, but in terms of their operationalization, they've not been effective. As far as I know, the challenge is even increasing. The current minister, one of the first things he attempted to do was to reduce artisanal mining, but it's beyond that. It would probably require constitutional amendments. Right now, the licenses are issued at the federal level. As a governor,
He said he's stopping that. He said he's doing everything. That they stopped that. You can't just go and get a license at the federal level and start to dig in his state.
Now, this is the position of the governors. But it is a constitutional issue. And it would take more than what one individual can do. The reality is that communities where these resources are embedded would want to benefit from those resources. So if the feeling is that it's coming from the federal government, in summary, they themselves would actually encourage these non-state armed groups to protect that land, to deny those who got the license from the federal authorities to come and mine it. So that's the situation. Then don't forget the foreign players who are also active and in certain instances feeding the conflict so that they will continue to mine the resources in those states.
Let's take a look at the situation in the southeast, because we just hear about, oh, they killed this person, or that person was killed, or this person was IPOB, this person was ESN, but the actual conflict in the southeast right now, is it still a separatist situation, or is there more to it than we know?
One of the things I hope that the coordinators of our national security architecture would do is to disaggregate the challenge. We haven't really done that. The same drivers that I mentioned in the Northwest are more or less, or even though with differences in variability, are the same drivers in the Southeast. Yes, there is a secessionist challenge, but that secessionist challenge is just a minuscule contributor to the problem in the Southeast. Land governance is a contributor. Resource extraction is another contributor. Presence of proliferation of small arms and light weapons. My economic migration from the north, especially places where there are crises, who now come and then deny local laborers, as it were, access to monies because their labor is cheap, is also another contributor.
When we're looking at the Northwest and kidnapping and bandage, we're able to identify historical issues, who's exploiting it, who the players are. Can we do the same thing for the Southeast?
Definitely. Definitely.
Who are the players?
Politicians are contributing to it. Businessmen who wants to control. I mean, in summary, I can tell you that when politicians go into it, it's to influence outcome of political decisions. So elections as an example, and certain things. Then when businessmen go into it, is to protect certain interest, as it were. So they would want a commissioner of police to be appointed. They use money as it were either at the federal level and all of that. And what are the reasons? Then you have other players like cult groups who are, or even the weapon manufacturing groups that exist in parts of the country. I haven't spoken about the gun running channels through the waterways in the southeast and to an extent even the south-south. To control those locations where those gun running channels go through, you need to exercise that kind of influence. So the same drivers, but like I said, at variances. Now the worry for me, just like in the south, in the northwest, we are not looking at those drivers. What you hear more is the activities of IPOB and the activities of Eastern Security Network. Rarely do you hear discussions around the interest of the political class who fund this violence, called groups, militants, gangs, and several others who are driving the violence in those locations.
I mean, with the Northwest, we're able to identify where the money is. With this one, it's a little murky, isn't it?
Not really.
Is the money apparent? Who's benefiting?
Not really.
Apart from this, I mean, you've mentioned some of these players, but I'm just saying, like, it just feels like with the Northwest, they kidnap, they make money. It's very clear. But with the Southeast, it does seem a little.
So for each of the issues. If you pick, let's say, kidnap for ransom, we know it's a criminal gang that is behind that. If you pick exploitation of resources, it's certain business moguls who are possibly behind that, and they are the ones who will now arm the criminal gangs. It could be the ESN or even gangs who offer themselves as players in that sector. They can arm them to go and take out a particular traditional ruler.
Do you think the Nigerian government is looking closely at these things? Because we hear from the military, we've killed so and so number, we broke so and so cells.
The Renewed Hope agenda talks about developing security strategies for each region. I believe that should be done based on a sociological study that looks at the dynamics, and then a strategy will now be developed. You can't just sit in Abuja and think you can develop a strategy. You need to go out there, conduct an assessment, a security assessment, understand the drivers, just like we've discussed them, and then come up with a strategy. In developing that strategy, allow for flexibility. There are variances even within the region. Cross River State, Calabar, is dealing with a challenge of gangs. I think they call them Shikolombo and Lakathera. It's peculiar to that location. You can't find it in any other location. So there must be variances in the strategy. And the strategy shouldn't be kinetic. So when the military is put in that position to go and solve problems that are rooted in developmental challenges, we can never solve it kinetically. Yes, the kinetic force is required to provide the atmosphere to implement those developmental changes. But what is important beyond anything is the political class.
And the non-kinetic measures.
Who is driving the non-kinetic? It's the political class.
I mean, it's interesting. Every time you listen to the military, especially in these places where the crime is driven by developmental issues, because you can tell, that poverty is rife in this place. It's only natural that criminality would come up and they would be harvesting ground.
And the military cannot solve.
But you hear the military, even when they apply kinetic measures, you hear them. I hear the CDS say it. I hear Major General Buba say it. I hear quite a number of them. Even the Air Force, I hear all of them say, look, we're doing our bit, but there's a non-kinetic bit that needs to be looked at. It almost feels like if every time they say it, it falls on deaf ears, like nothing is done afterwards.
I mean, it wouldn't do justice to this conversation if we don't talk about the political economy of conflict. That is also a factor.
The political economy of conflict.
There are certain players within the security sector that are benefiting from the funding that goes into managing the conflict. Those players will not want the conflict to end. And so some of the statements that you've mentioned, yes, they are statements, but when it comes to looking the political class in the eye and telling them behind closed doors that, look, if you don't do this, no matter the amount of military operation, come on, Kela, Operation Safe Haven in Jos, how many years has it been ongoing? And yet our National Assembly has never deemed it fit to call the military class to say, look, guys, this thing has been ongoing for this long. This is meant to be a stopgap operation, but it's ongoing for this long. A new operation is about to be introduced in the Northwest. The National Assembly is still in recess, but I'm hoping that when they resume, they call the military guards, sit them down and say, you are starting an operation. What is the mandate of that operation? What is the timeline? What do you need to ensure that that operation, which is a stopgap operation, ends? Otherwise, what we would see is a replication. At the moment, I can recount God knows how many operations that have been ongoing for more than a decade. We have Operation Safe Haven. We have
Hadarindaji,
with no timeline for when they're going to. So, I mean, how do we run a country like this?
I want to thank you very much, Mr. Kabir Adamu, for being with us on Hard Copy. And good luck with all the work I know you have ahead of you.
Thank you very much, and to you too.
That's our program tonight, but the conversation never ends. Join us on our social media platforms and let's hear your thoughts on tonight's conversation. Thank you for watching. I'm Kayla Magwa. Good night.